Hi everyone, welcome back to Going Online, Reimagining Teaching and Learning. I'm your host Claire Macken, Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor Teaching and Learning in the College of Business and Law at RMIT University, and it's so great to be back with you today, brought to you by TEXA in collaboration with RMIT. If you tuned in last week, you won't believe my internet actually fully crashed at 1:01 p.m, 1 minute after we finished up. And I think today will be absolutely fine. So we're loving your questions and comments in the chat. Keep this up today. And a reminder, we've had all of our previous comments in the chat answered. If you'd like to go and have a look at the TEXA Online Learning Good Practice website, you'll find them there. And today is our 5th episode in our webinar series. Our second last. Our previous sessions have addressed the topics of best practice for establishing online learning, enabling staff to work in an online learning environment, assessment integrity, designing curriculum for an online environment, and today we're addressing the topic of student experience and support. And as always, we're being recorded today. You'll find the recordings on the TEXA Online Learning Good Practice website, and if you would like to read TEXA's privacy policy, you can find it at texa.gov.au privacy. And just today is a really special day. It's the last day of Reconciliation Week for 2020. The week runs from the 27th of May to today, the 3rd of June. And those dates are significant. On the 27th of May, 1967, over 90% of all Australians voted to change 2 sections of the Constitution in a referendum. First, the ability of the Parliament to make laws with respect to Aboriginal people, and second, an amendment to count Aboriginal people within the Australian census. The other date, the 3rd of June, today, in 1992, the High Court handed down the decision of Mabo and the state of Queensland, recognising native title. And so in this important week, I would like to give the following acknowledgement. Let us all, wherever we are in Australia, acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we are individually on right now and their continuing connection to land, waters and community, and we pay our respects to the cultures, country and elders, past and present and emerging. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm on here in Melbourne today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So today, turning to our webinar, it's the topic of designing curriculum for an online environment. We have 2 expert panellists for you, Indumathi and Tom Whitford. Indumathi is a Chartered Electrical and Electronics Engineer and the Deputy Dean at Engineering Institute of Technology. She has over 17 years of experience with a diverse background in engineering, education, business and leadership. Having studied in India, Singapore, Germany and Australia, Indu has a passion for diversity, inclusivity and accessibility in education. Her recent research interest includes the impact of disruptive technologies in education, and her current research is in using EEG to detect attention in the learning environment. How fascinating. And using data to empower both students and teachers for a better learning experience. Indu is a strong advocate for women in STEM, excellent, and shares her expertise as a mentor to young students. It's brilliant to have you here today. Our second panellist, Tom Whitford, is an academic teaching and learning specialist and lecturer in marketing in the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of Melbourne. His research interests span innovative approaches to business, education, e-learning, online instruction and pedagogy, and effective learning design. Prior to his academic career, Tom was an education consultant, academic program planner, marketing communication specialist, as well as a digital marketing strategist. And his mission is to promote high quality university teaching for improved student learning at the nexus of best practices in design, historical pedagogies and contemporary technologies. Awesome bios. So let's get started. Our first question is for Indu, and the question I have for you is, do we need to look at design, student experience, support and wellbeing as a complete ecosystem? Over to you, Indu.
Thanks, Claire. I think unfortunately it's a side effect of coming from engineering background that I started looking at things from top to bottom as a systemic process. So looking at things from beginning to end as an ecosystem. And I actually have come to see and believe that everything is in fact interconnected. Now, there is a plethora of research out there, outlining the relationship between student experience and their academic performance. You have a good student experience, you get, good outcomes with academic performance. So when it comes to designing student support and experience, I think we need to look at it, holistically and not in siloed departments or processes. So even departments that we may think that does not have any direct contact with students, they may have indirect impact into student experience. And unless we look at things holistically and in depth, we are not going to find those gaps. So for example, even in a simple case of how a scholarship form or an application process is designed, it can have a greater impact on how a student experiences and sees that particular institute. So looking top to bottom from, it could be from your website content, from your course advisors, any marketing initiatives, student onboarding, student journeys, support, and all the way to alumni relations. I think everything needs to paint a cohesive picture and shows, that we have a shared culture and we speak the same language throughout and not send any mixed messages to students. And a critical point in understanding, especially in this kind of time that we are going through, is that we can't just take, one mode, what we do in one mode and mirror it or try to put it on another, because it's just not going to be effective. So I think leadership is critical in these areas to provide that, holistic support for any mode of delivery. So we do have to look at this holistically as an ecosystem that supports, that adapts, changes, and grows with each other to ensure that we don't oversee any critical areas or gaps. Yeah. Back to you, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks, Indu. That's a great start. And I'm just surprised there's no questions from our audience. So I would love you to put some questions in, and if you like a question that's in there, give it a thumbs up and we'll definitely get to that one. I learned how to sort the question by thumbs up last week, so that's a bonus. We're going to ask Tom some questions now, so I'd love you to put some questions into our chat. So Tom, over to you. What changes to online student learning capabilities have you witnessed given the COVID-19 adjustments, and what teaching strategies have worked best to deal with them? Great question.
Yeah, so it's sort of in two parts. Thanks, Claire. The first one is really born from just asking students how the past sort of semester has been for them. And what we're sort of seeing reported by the student cohorts is obviously they're feeling quite anxious about everything that is going on, but also a degree of isolation. And we know that the campus is the physical campus has been so important for students coming together and feeling a sense of community. So I think we're sort of charged as educators to think about how we replicate that in an online space. And so there's a few things that we can do to help support students feeling connected to one another, but also feeling like they're part of a teaching and learning team. I think a lot of it has to do with sort of reaching out to them and saying, well, what does an appropriate amount of information look like to you? What are some of perhaps the materials that would help you digest, the information overload that is coming? And a lot of students are reporting that they spend a lot of time online looking at lecture slides. They're spending a lot of time doing research for their assignments, spending a lot of time even just relaxing and leisure, using Netflix online. So there's a lot of screen time happening. So I think as educators too, we need to think about this attention problem as well, and think about maybe even distilling the volume and the load of information that we're presenting them, and making it okay in our synchronous and live teaching moments to have some off-task discussion, and making that in some ways almost welcome, a reprieve for students, because they're the things that they were doing on campus physically, talking to one another before class about a whole host of things that weren't related to the content. So if we can deliberately sort of bring those moments back into the live classroom in particular, but even some of the asynchronous discussion forums, having spaces where it's okay for students to talk about how they're adjusting to isolation and COVID, I think that's totally fine. And we're seeing students sort of flock to forums that allow that. And you see things like peer support behaviours organically emerge. So they do help each other out because they know it's in some ways a bit of a safe space.
Thanks, Tom. So a question for Indu. How do we develop online pedagogy skills and training for faculty or staff given the rapid pace of virtual delivery and transition? And keep your questions coming. We'd love that.
Thanks, Claire. I think that's a great question. I mean, we live in a time where, it's not just about global connectedness and, having technology. Students are in 21st century, and most of us have already been delivering blended training and education. So it's not something new in terms of lecturers or faculty trying to teach and adapt to the online mode. It's more so about the fact that when we are completely gone online, and there is obviously, like Tom said, the lack of campus and the lack of that campus and face-to-face support is lacking. What do we do? What do we do there? So what we can do is obviously provide support for our faculty and training during this time. So what we did here at EIT is that once we know that everything had to go online and there's no more going to be blended or face-to-face, we literally worked 4 days trying to tailor a training and orientation for all our faculty as well as the students, to ensure that they had access to all the systems in place from home, and if there are any issues, how do we go about it? And on top of that, I think the focus was also in terms of engagement. How do you engage with students online? How do you keep that connection going? So communication was a very important part. We use Teams very widely in the college between students and the faculty. So communications was very important, as well as I think understanding, and I think this goes both ways between teachers or the faculty, as well as between students and the faculty, that having compassion during these times and also having flexibility in terms of how we approach things, and setting realistic expectations. I mean, I don't think anyone's expecting a top world-notch online learning and training in these times. People are happy to adapt to what you can provide, as long as the expectations has been set clearly and the engagement and communication is constant, and enough support is being provided. So I think again, it's having that engagement between the administration, could be our IT systems, your faculty, your students, and your student support as a single source of truth. I think is really critical. Thank you, Claire. Back to you.
Thanks, Indu. Question for Tom. Is anyone teaching students both face-to-face and online simultaneously? And if so, what special approaches are needed? And I've done this, by the way, it's super hard. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Claire. I think the question sort of is around this idea of sort of a blended subject. Perhaps you're teaching face-to-face as well as an online cohort at the same time, if I've understood the question correctly. And look, I think we need to remind ourselves that it's only the mode has changed. And I would charge, I've been telling my faculty colleagues this as well. Keep your pedagogy at the forefront of your mind. Keep it the same if you can. If there's a certain style and approach you have with your teaching and your assessment, it's important to think just because students are learning remotely, you don't have to jeopardize, the learning outcomes or anything else. You keep those things as they are. And I think there's almost an opportunity with online, because there's a whole host of online and virtual tools that can support you and actually even sometimes elevate your teaching practice. So what I would say is, for the students that are learning remotely, be mindful that they are looking at maybe a pre-recorded lecture, or they don't have that opportunity sometimes for a live engagement and or a questioning ability as students in the room might have. But for the majority of other tasks, it's exactly the same. So we do need to keep that at the forefront of our mind. And I'm just going to paraphrase a friend of mine who's a learning designer, who said, actually, well, online is actually more face-to-face than face-to-face. And if you actually sit in any modern day lecture theatre, this is pre-COVID, of course, and you look around, you see a whole bunch of students who are all trained towards a singular focal point, and that's a lecturer speaking. And some of them are on Facebook talking to one another in the room. Some of them are talking to friends who are not in the room, but it's actually not very discursive. And there's not a whole bunch of organic discussion. When you are teaching online, and if it's in a Zoom with a synchronous session, there is a chat function and students are talking to one another. So anecdotally, I told students, okay, at the end of this class, we're going to have some time for teams and group formation. And a lot of them said, we've already done it. So we have this amazing sort of gossip channel that's happening in the background. And I think that's really important to have, that students are allowed a space to talk. Maybe it's around it, it could even be, like I said, the gossip channel, and it's off task, but it's important that we preserve that and actually maybe even appreciate that, to overcome the stigma that online learning is a bit inert, or it doesn't have that sort of human element to it.
Love that advice, Tom, completely. So Indu, do you think that students like studying online, or do you think they will want to go back to face-to-face or a blend in the future?
Great question, Claire. Thank you. I'm going to look at this from my own perspective since I'm studying as well. And if students have gone from an on-campus mode into an online mode during this, this pandemic period, and having spoken to some of my students as well, I think most of them prefer a blend in the future, and that's because, I mean, we've gone from, like Tom said, completely focusing on one point, in the classroom, face-to-face at a lecture. We have now suddenly, in a very short period of time, adapted to, having options, having options and having developed the independence as well in terms of how we study and how we interact with each other, be it in the community, be it with our learning materials, or be it with our peers. And so I think students prefer that, that freedom of choice and that independence they've gained. And I think it is actually right to nurture that independence, because to be honest, when I'm looking at what is developing in the world out there, I think these kind of pandemics are going to be quite increasing. And, as it is, communities are trying to become this, disconnected but still well-connected communities. So I think, and I have heard from my students as well, and it's my personal choice. If I could work, I think I would be working in a blended model, and I think students would prefer a blended model too. Thank you, Claire. Back to you.
Thanks, Indu. So, question for Tom. Sorry, I just lost my question. I'll get it back up. Here it is. I'm worried about student engagement after 8 weeks of suddenly and unexpectedly moving to online. They're wanting to go back to face-to-face learning. I'm wondering how to keep them motivated going forward.
Thanks, Claire. That's a really good question around engagement and motivation. So, there's been some anecdotal evidence from, faculty, staff and teachers around students perhaps not absorbing the amount of information that is online. And there's this sense that, okay, we're not getting the visceral feedback that we used to. If students are confused or they don't really process the information, we don't kind of get that in the online forum. I want to sort of maybe think about how we go about reframing this, especially for students. And we need to do a really good job in the first few weeks of ensuring that there is teacher presence, that we're obvious and we are present in these spaces. It might be recording videos, it might even be hosting some live sessions, it might be really being quite responsive with emails and discussion forum comments to kind of show that you are there and that you're committed to fostering and engaging with students, and also helping students engage with one another. And I think what you're doing there is you're almost reframing this as, okay, so this is what we've got to do for the next few months ahead. It's admittedly, you might want to even broach the issue around, comparisons between face-to-face and online if you want to. I think good luck to you. That's a brave approach, but more so think about reframing the opportunity and what it means. And a lot of that, actually, if you look at the ways in which students talk to one another, it's actually quick and rapid fire anyway. In social media forums, it's very responsive. Feel free to unleash, use some memes if you want to, throw in a GIF or two, and try and sort of meet them on the level of speed and responsiveness, but also some degree of personality and humor needs to come through. And I think that we shouldn't overlook the intimacy that online learning provides as well. Everyone is learning most likely in their pajamas. They're in their lounge rooms. It is a uniquely personal moment for a lot of people. And I think we need to meet that moment and become, maybe even show a little bit more than what we're used to in terms of our personalities and our hobbies and things like this. So keep those moments alive. And that sort of drags students over the line in terms of, hey, this isn't as threatening or as like I said, inert as it was once perceived. And that helps with overcoming that stigma, I think.
Thank you. Great advice. I love the idea of personality and humour online and learning in your PJs. In fact, my daughter's class is doing online yoga for school, which is quite strange because they want us to join in, which is also strange. Question for you, Indu. I'd love a follow-up. This has got four likes, maybe 5 now. I'd love a follow-up with COVID-19 and in particular what's really of talk now around screen fatigue. I agree. How can we help students now balance that increased cognitive burden they experience when they are now having to have potentially increased screen time from work, life and learning? Great question.
It is indeed a great question. Thank you, Claire. Now, screen fatigue, I think, even, it's not just isolated to students. We all have felt the same. I think what we all did in the beginning was that, just to see or understand that we're all engaged and, making sure that, we all felt that, by looking at a person in a video channel that we will feel a bit more connected. And so that's when the screen fatigue set in, because we expected students to have their videos on and use their microphones to show that engagement in the classroom, or even listening to webinars. Again, it's going to be engaging with the, a textbook, as in an ebook or on online material. I think trying to design activities that are in a multi-channeled approach, and when I say multi-channel, it could be from they're actually reading a physical a book or an article from a newspaper perhaps, or actually engaging with their environment rather than just engaging with the content that they have online. So for example, in engineering, you can get them to design experiments that that could be something to do with from around their house. I think we do have to be a bit more flexible and creative in how we try and break that screen fatigue with students. I can think of, for example, if it's an students who's in the art, you can ask them to go outside, during that time when they can go outside and interact with the environment by taking photographs or something like that. And I think it is okay, and it is okay to tell the students to, not having to just reach out online, but to use other form of communication, which is like, use a telephone, call your lecturers, or call your student support. And I think that's where we can, show them that it's not just a one way or a one channel that they can contact us and gain support or learn their materials from, but there is multi channels and the multiple ways of doing it, and that's fine. We don't have to be connected online all the time, and it's okay. Thank you, Claire. Back to you.
Thanks, Indu. Yeah, I agree. We shouldn't be connected all the time. So, Tom, over to you. A question around good practice. So what good practices can you see that are emerging in the era of student experience online? And what about students at risk?
Yeah, so great question. It's in sort of two parts in a way. The at-risk question, I want to sort of frame it around this idea of silence and how we interpret silence online, because there are diametrically opposite ways in which we respond to that. And I think the first one is if we consider, well, students aren't contacting me, I don't get emails from students, there's nothing on the forums. Well, on one hand, that could be seen as a positive because your learning materials that you've designed and that you've codified for online, you've hard coded that into your LMS platforms, is robust enough, it's comprehensive enough that students are making sense of it. They're navigating it with ease and they kind of get it, to the point where that you could say that you've supported them really well. I mean, the other side of things is you could be sitting there and there might be a sort of an intrinsic feeling of, well, I'm not teaching, I'm not doing anything because I'm not getting any emails. So our response to that could be to outreach and say, hey, are there any questions? It's sort of a bit lonely here on the forums. I feel like I'm talking to myself. So it kind of makes it hard to think about, well, what students are at risk. And this is the moment I want to say hats off to all my friends that have been looking at learning analytics for a very long time and saying that perhaps their moment has come and gone. Look, we are right back in that now. Please become comfortable with your learning management systems and the analytics that are built in. You can often get reports around how many times students have logged in, how much time they've spent on certain pages. If you're seeing dips in the graph, and a lot of that needs to be corroborated with their performance in things like assessment tasks, if you're seeing students sort of with quite moderate performance and also aligning with really low engagement and participation in the Canvas and or LMS sites that you use, I actually think you've probably got case to say, look, send an email. How are you feeling about your learning? Is there anything I can support you with? I can see that perhaps you haven't logged in for 2 weeks. It is okay to make those interventions. It's what we would have done in a physical face-to-face environment. If a student is not turning up to tutorials, that's kind of what you say to them. So I think that we need to come back to this idea of you as a manager of your cohort, that if there is a student who is flagging in terms of their performance, it's okay to reach out and say, with quite a pointed intervention, and say, look, I've noticed that you haven't submitted, your forum comments for this week. And to check in, it's sort of a, it's a velvet sledgehammer approach to cohort management. You need to be gentle with this because there could be a whole host of reasons why that student is not engaging or has disconnected. So there are just some of the ways in which we think about students at risk and also that element of participation as well.
Thanks, Tom. Love the velvet sledgehammer analogy. And yeah, my whole life at the moment is interpreting silence online. Hope you and the audience are enjoying today. Probably time for a few more questions if you have any. And actually I have some really interesting ones. And just on questions, there were two that we have around how are teachers doing lab sessions online where students need access to equipment and chemicals, and how do we provide lab sessions during online courses? We actually addressed that last week, so I'd really recommend you have a look back at the wonderful webinar that went into some of the strategies around practical STEM type classes and how to deal with those online. So back to our question. So Indu, do you have any suggestions on key indicators to check whether students are learning while teaching online or at a virtual class? Over to you.
Thank you. This actually ties in also with what Tom was answering just before in terms of student engagement and the risk factor as well. In terms of looking at the key indicators, like Tom said, one of the things we can look is, we can actually pull out reports and see how often students logged in, when did they log in last, and how long have they actually been interacting with the learning materials. So that's one report that you can pull out and see in terms of whether students have been engaging with your material. And similarly to what Tom said, you've got your forums, you've got your blogs, your reflective journals, and so on to see whether or not that they have engaged. But in a live, say, online session, what you can see is actually you can build in what you call as an interactive quiz in the middle of your lectures and see whether students are responding. And it doesn't have to be always a microphone type of answers, but it could be just polls, it could be just true or false questions, and see who is interacting and who is engaging. And similarly, to pre-recorded lectures that you might have, or slides that you might have, or activities you might have, you could have a quiz or a session, questions built right into it or built after it, and see who's engaged with it as well. Now, one of the other things that we do with students, especially it's as a practice during the COVID, what we've done is we log in a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes before the classroom starts, so that anyone who wants to come, before to ask questions, or, even if they don't have questions, if they just simply logged earlier, I tend to actually try and open the dialogue to them about how they are feeling in this situation, about their anxiety around COVID, or about the anxiety about, they could have lost their jobs and, struggling, they could be feeling isolated. So just having that personal human connection that doesn't have to do with anything to do with the content, learning content, but just connecting with them as just a human being, showing them that you understand what's going on, also tells you whether or not they are engaged. Because the minute a student is actually logging in to see information or participating in a tutorial, you do know that they do want to learn, but sometimes things that are going on in their lives at the moment can set them back. So providing that support of, just questioning, I do understand what you're going through, we all are in the similar boat. How can I help you? Or how can I refer you to other sort of help that is around? I think that's how we can actually see whether students are actually, participating. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Indu. Question for Tom. Student preparation and readiness for online study is key in setting students up for success in an online learning environment. What is your advice for both academic and student support to better prepare students for online study? Are there any specific materials and or hints or tips? I think I've fixed the problem with that question. That assist with this. What is the approach to support students who are identified as unprepared or not ready for online study? Over to you, Tom.
Great question again. There's a lot happening in terms of the specific materials. The good news is I think we're slowly playing catch up to, we're seeing experts respond to this. We're seeing a lot of popular press respond to this. The one thing I want to say, it's a quote that I've seen repeated in a lot of, the online journals, and also anecdotally you hear this in the corridors, virtual corridors, is that I didn't sign up for this. Is kind of the phrase that you hear. And you hear that, I want to address it from both the facilitator and teacher perspective and also from the student. Now, from an educator perspective, there is a whole host of extra learning and professional development, personal development that we need to go through to get ourselves comfortable with teaching online. I mean, teaching to a laptop is very odd for the first time user. And so there's a whole host of even tech requirements and getting our head around what Zoom is or Microsoft Teams or even what LMS we're using, or like the analytics I said before. That's quite a learning curve for a lot of people. And so there is this sort of natural resistance to it. We also know that with online teaching and learning, a lot of the time, because we're hard coding the learning into the platform, most of the work needs to be done prior to week 0. So you see this huge, which is an inverse to what we're perhaps doing with our just-in-time teaching normally, is that you see this huge effort required before the subject is even launched, which is preparing materials and putting, you know, some readings and slides and even text online. That requires a lot of work, and that's pre-teach. So we can see that we feel like we're burdened already before classes start. Now, again, that goes back to that idea I said before. We can think about how we reframe and maybe adjust our expectations as to what is to be delivered throughout the semester or the teaching period. But I want to also talk about how students interpret this. These are not online students. For those that are lucky enough to have taught online with dedicated online students, they have signed up for a program that is virtual and remote. And a lot of the time they're learning distant. They are in other states, they're in other countries. So they can appreciate the benefits of what you're doing as an educator and as a teacher, and they're a more open learner because they're comfortable with the mode of delivery. A lot of these students though have transitioned. They were traditionally online on campus students, and they're now moving to an online. So like I said, we need to think about how prepared they are. Universities and some of our institutions now are getting, I think, more comfortable with materials and support, even providing on-demand and live support through websites, for example. But I think it also means that we need to be a bit more flexible with our expectations, that these students perhaps, you know, for example, a lot of their learning might have been discursive. It might have been sitting on a lawn or a bench or over lunch talking to their colleagues and peers around what it means for them to sit in a class, or even trying to figure out something in the subject that you're trying to teach. So again, we need to go back to this idea of maybe just connecting with students, asking them if the materials are too overwhelming, maybe if they're not enough. And a lot of that is just hand in hand with students. And that's the only way we know how to adjust our own teaching, is to really ask them.
Great advice, Tom. I love it. And yeah, I love I didn't sign up for this either. My first day at the College of Business and Law was the day of lockdown. So I started my first day of a new job was the day of lockdown. So very interesting changes. Indu, we've got a question for you. Are there any advantages to students' experience online, or are we learning anything new about engagement?
Great question there, Claire. Yes, I think there are advantages to students' experience online. I mean, I think one of the main things is that because we are putting things online, everything is recorded. So students have the ability to, you know, watch it as many times as they want, you know, before they actually get the material. Again, you can pause, you know, come back to it, you know, take notes. It's much easier for students to do this now. And similarly, when you're putting things online, I mean, we run remote labs online for students, you know, so they can actually run their experiments again multiple times till they get it, and they don't actually have to, even if they break something, it's easy for us to fix it on this end. So, and on top of that, I think as well, students actually now, if they are doing things online, and especially in a flexible manner, they perhaps can actually have a bit more work-life balance as well. You know, they can be working part-time and they don't have to be face-to-face in a class to get that lecture or notes and materials, but they can attend at any time online. Similarly, we can actually, and we do actually have instructors and lecturers from pretty much around the world. So that also helps in terms of getting that talent pool in terms of teaching the students from around the world. In terms of the second part of the question, whether we are learning anything new about engagement, we definitely are. And I think one thing I've learned is you can't have cookie cutter solutions. You know, that's just not going to work. Each student, you know, they are individuals, they come with their unique, you know, technical competency and their unique, even cultural background in terms of how they interact with technology and how they interact with this online session. So we have to take that into mind as well when we are designing things for online and designing things for engaging students online. So, you know, keeping things really simple, you know, simple language, because like Tom said, if they've got a question in mind, if there's a face-to-face classroom, you can directly ask your lecturer right in front of you. But if it's a concept that they're finding it difficult to understand, you know, If it's in an online mode, again, you have to have multiple channels of support for them to reach out, and clear, communication of how to reach out and what to expect in terms of, do you expect answers within 24 hours? Do you expect answer within 6 hours? They need to know that, so we can reduce the anxiety in there as well. So keeping simple language helps them to not go in circles of, okay, what is this now? So keep it simple, keep it clear, well-paced, clear instructions as well. And I think what other things works in terms of student engagement is also buddy system that we tried introducing, and that has worked quite well. So even though they are isolated, you pair them with someone in their class, so they can check on each other to make sure that they're doing fine, and that buddy system helps in terms of engagement as well. So there is a lot of things going on in terms of what we think about engagement in a face-to-face mode as compared to a online mode. And yeah, and I think we will be continuing to learn as we go into the next phase of blended format as well. How do we keep the balance between that face-to-face support as well as the online support?
Thanks, Indu. So question for Tom, and I feel the pain here. What about extra support for fatigued, exhausted, overworked teachers who have to support the students, especially on an emotional level, reassuring them all the time and trying to make a difference to them on a personal level? What do you say about that?
I feel it. I think it's a really good question, because anyone who has been teaching over the past few months can sympathise with what it has felt like to move into this space that's not just subject matter expert, but into almost quasi-therapist and counsellor. And for anyone who, I have full respect for anyone who is a parent and has kids at home, because then you're also teacher to them and your parent and your worker and you're all of these things. And I think taking your students on that journey and making it okay, and I've had a lot of success with this with my own cohort, but really even just expressing emotional sentiment, I think it's kind of foreign for us to have that in a classroom. And for the first time ever, it's here. And whether or not it's a shadow or it's a ray of light, it's how you frame it again. And I think it's okay to, sympathize with students that, yes, this is hard, and they're undergoing, massive changes to the way in which they process and comprehend information and attention and all of these things. But also feel free to talk about yourself for a moment and say, look, I love Indu's idea around this idea of, it's okay to contact me between these hours, and these are the hours by which I'm going to be available via email. You can expect a response in these times. Have those parameters for your availability, because I think it's really important to keep structure. And I would also like to say, please keep and retain any moment you can that is synchronous or live, because that scheduling helps. And we've seen that students have reported greater levels of enjoyment, experience, satisfaction with any subject or topic that keeps these live moments, because it's a time in their day. It's a calendar entry for them. And it's almost like the anchor that is keeping people, afloat. And when I say that keep those moments, keep those, in some ways, don't make it a lecture, don't make it, a death by PowerPoint slide, but keep it as discussion based. And like I said, bring in reflections and your own explorations as to how you're undergoing this change as a teacher as well. Students love to hear about this. It's quasi voyeuristic in a way, and you might be uncomfortable with it, but look, just embrace it now and almost think about it as a unique moment in sort of the history of teaching and education. We have never had a more captive audience. Everyone is in lockdown. Everyone has a lot of time available, and I think we need to think about that as well. This is a monumentous period for what education is and could be.
Love it. Totally agree. Indu, is there a fundamental difference between what students want and what they need? Good question. And how should we navigate this potential disconnect when student feedback can make academics reluctant to take risks with innovation in curriculum?
It's a very good question. I've actually had to, deal with these feedbacks myself. So I think, it's like telling a child, we know what is right, just do it. No, that's not the way to go about it. But the way I set out when I deal with these questions is that tell the students what you're trying to do, why you're doing it, and what you expect as an outcome. And I've tried this with, for example, reflective practice for a group of engineering students. And engineering students just love calculations. Writing about feelings is a no-no. But we did try that, and what we found was it was a bit of a friction, and they were just complaining every week for the first few weeks. But at the end of it, they actually got something out of it. So I think setting out the reasons behind why you're doing what you're doing and how you're going to do it, it's helpful. And what I would say to academics in terms of feedback and dealing with the how do you innovate and take risks when we look at feedbacks. I think again it's a buddy system in academics as well. Throw your ideas to a peer, find out how you can actually fine tune, find out how you can set out the scenario rather than trying to deal with it yourself and worrying about feedback. And I also think that leadership is critical here in terms of allowing the academics to take risks and fail as well. We all have not born with how to deal with every single situation and student and not have one single negative feedback. That's just not the reality. So I think overall, the academics and faculties need support from the leadership team as well to take risks and fail. And if it fails, learn from the mistakes and improve on.
Thanks, Indu. I love the idea of engineers writing about their feelings. That's awesome. Tom, final question for you, bit of reflection. What do you think will be the most proud on the area of student engagement and support online? And when we all come out of the bunker at the end of the year, what are we going to look back on?
Thanks, Claire. I mean, coming out of the bunker, I cannot wait. But at the same time, I've been really appreciative of all of my colleagues and the teachers around it. That idea, I want to pick up Indu's risk-taking. I think that's been the thing. That, a lot of people are looking for permission for things. Is it okay if I do this? Is it okay? I would like to say we are at sort of frontier level of what online teaching and learning could be. And that's just because of the scale. We've kind of shifted overnight. And obviously we need to be compliant with the rules and regulations that we have, but use this time to experiment. And I actually think this is part of that opportunity I was talking to before. And I think that's the one thing I will be most proud of, is that, online learning was always kind of seen as the ugly cousin to face-to-face, and that stigma that comes with online learning, that it is inferior and that it's, it's not human and whatnot. I actually think we're moving now to a space that can be done in a way that is relatable. There is a community and there is a sort of a best practice that is starting to evolve that's kind of different to what we thought it was maybe 1 or 2 years ago. So look, here we are at this sort of critical juncture, and maybe that will be the most important point for a post-COVID teaching and learning landscape, is that we have a revolutionized way of what and how we teach online, and then also what students experience and what their expectations are of that as well.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks everyone for our wonderful session today. I'd love to thank our two panelists, Indu V and Tom Whitford. Thanks to our audience for your great questions. We love seeing your questions. If you've got any feedback, put it in the chat right now. Just give us a thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. Tell us what you like, what you didn't, and always you can email your feedback to onlinelearning@texas.gov.au. Don't forget to check out the TEXA website. You'll see the other webinars. And next week, it's going to be a special one. We've come to you from my upstairs lounge room, my kids' area, for 5 sessions. Next week is our final session 6. We have a special event and welcoming back our first panelists, Dr. Dawn Gilmore and Dr. James Adenopoulos, to have a chat about the whole series. We're going to wrap it up, bring together all the lessons learned and look to the future. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. Picking up Tom's words, I think we could call it coming out of the bunker. Thanks everyone for attending today. We hope you have enjoyed going online, reimagining, teaching and learning, and we'll see you next week. Bye.